As you no doubt heard, this conference, we are now recording this webinar, and I'll do a quick introduction here. Good morning, and welcome to our final webinar in our series of spring and early summer webinars. Today's topic is best practices when your family-owned or privately held business is in conflict or turmoil. It's a big issue for a lot of business owners out there. We're very pleased to have Jack Veale, president of PTCFO, Inc. I've known Jack for a number of years. He's spoken at various events that we've had throughout the years, and we're very pleased to have him. He's one of the best at handling this kind of issue, so we're happy about that. And my name is Chris Cooper. I am with the Business Succession Planning Program at Kent State University. It's a adjunct program of the Ohio Employee Ownership Center, and we are running these webinars with support from the Ohio Department of Development to do this type of thing. So we're pleased to have you here, pleased to have Jack, and I think without further ado, Jack, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. To get started, we'll go to the next screen. I'm hitting the next button, next slide. Let's see what happens here. Good. What I'd like you to understand is, when I do speak out to public groups, the first question I ask is, do you have any brothers and sisters you've never fought with? And nobody raises their hand. And I ask them, if you've been married for more than 2 years, have you never fought with your bride or spouse? And no hands go up. So what happens is you have to understand that putting two people or more together, you're going to have conflicts, and conflicts are normal. It's how you handle them that makes for the success of an organization, including a family. So one of the things I'd like you to understand is the family system and how it relates to a business system. And relationships function interdependently means that you depend upon each other, but you are individuals. So you are responsible to each other, but yet you're self-reliant. And in family systems, there's predictable patterns of interaction between the groups. So what would happen is that you will find that your brothers and sisters and mom and dads will all act accordingly. If you want to hit trigger buttons, you know what they are, and they will act predictably. Open and closed boundary systems means that space where you can go in and out of sometimes you can go in somebody's bedroom, sometimes you can't. And so going in and out of people's bedrooms or their own lives is where respect is created by having these boundary systems. There's a value system of having the whole is worth more than the sum of the parts in a family system. In some cases in a business, that's not true. And the use of messages rules are there to shape the members. So not going out at night because you didn't do your homework. Those are some of the things that are taught throughout the generations by the first generation. And the one thing that's really interesting that I'd like to emphasize is that the word systems, subsystems, coalitions, and alliances it's very common to have two brothers or two sisters or a brother and sister who get along with each other while they don't with others in the family. So that is going to be, those are common things that happen in families, especially large ones, and it's true to a business. So next. See if it works. Good. So in the family system, there's emotion versus rationalization. Family systems look at each other, where businesses look out and look at the marketplace, while and the family looks inside amongst each other. In family systems, there's the importance of not changing too much because you want to keep traditions. In business, change is required. And in the family system, there's an unconditional acceptance. Even though you may be a criminal, we still love you. In business, that's not true. And the tasks of a family is to nurture, develop self-esteem, and to grow adults. In the business system, it's about developing skills, profitability, and market penetration and innovation. If you look at these two things together, if you have a family system embedded into a business system, just the nature of the beast is there are going to be differences of agreement, and differences of issues, and differences in agreement, and there's going to be trouble. So how do you handle that? Let's go to the next one. So one of the things that happens in families is that even in non-family businesses where you have, I started the business, none of you worked with me, or in my family rather, but you now work with me. You're now sitting there. I promised you the business in some ways, shape, or form because you've been with me, the loyal person, for a long, long time. And that is where things happen, when the promises are made. Another one that happens is that there's compensation agreements. Okay? And another one is one of you are not part of my family, but you're a producer. What do we do about you? And then the other part is that how do you govern a family when you have to govern the business? And you're the CEO. It's hard because you've got to go back to the conflicts you have between managing a family and their expectations and systems versus a business. What we find on a management perspective is that there's a lack of clear vision by the next generation. They just don't have, some people call it a long-range plan, some call it a strategic plan. But as you'll see in a couple of slides down, is that the typical tenure of a CEO is about 15 years. That's if you can make it through the 3 or 4 years, you'll make it to 15. So now the question is, what have you done in those 15 years? And what's your plan? If anybody in the audience just takes a moment and writes down what their age will be in 15 years and what it will look like, is the same exercise you have to do both for yourself and for the business. And you don't have to have a lot of numbers. What you have to do is have a vision. And you can see companies that have been, like you can go to people that are 15 years older than you and ask them, geez, tell me what happened. What should I prepare for? The same thing should go with a business. If you're 30 million in sales, I would say you should be 130 million in sales. I'd expect you to be at 120 million in 15 years. And you'll say, my gosh, that's impossible. But there are businesses that did it. And so find them and look at them, because you could ask an adult that's 15 years older than you and say, you made it. Tell me what you did wrong and what did you do right. By the way, feel free to ask questions at any point. Just chat with the chair, and I'll stop what I'm talking about and field those questions. Lack of transition planning. That is one of the toughest parts you can have because it takes 8 years, and that'll be described later. The other part of it is that there's a communication. A number of people say the number one problem is communication. And I view it that there is a lack of training in people's expectations and their skill sets that lead to poor communication. So we always push for teamwork and working a set of systems such as problem solving or leadership teams or things like that in order to get people to develop their skills and communicate better with each other. You don't have to be the best communicator to be a CEO, but it really helps a lot if you are. I'm going into ESOPs because I thought it'd be interesting for you to hear, because there's sometimes there are ESOP companies that are involved. Family controlled for several generations have legacy expectations, and if that happens in an ESOP, it'll happen to any other company in a transition. There's always the issue of family management composition is too high. A dominant founder. I mean, I ran my business. It's my way. I'm not willing to let go because I don't trust my kids. Could be the fact that I don't have any kids that are or people that are non-family to take over the business. But I want to sell because it's time for me to harvest for what I've worked hard for. Sometimes, like what we've been going through over the last 3 or 4 years, is very difficult market conditions. The one thing that's really, really important for a transition to work smooth is you have to have good directors who are independent and can help the CEO through some of these very difficult conditions. You could be missing expertise, and there could be some management conflicts just because they're all vying for your attention to move forward. because they want to become the next CEO. This screen is there to help you look at the various dynamics that go on in an organization, and what are the governing structures that cover those areas. So, for example, on the top left-hand corner, there's a pink family circle that goes cross-intersects with the management, cross-intersects with ownership, and cross-intersects with the employee and employee owners. And in the middle of that is the CEO. And then you have cousins and founders and key managers and next generation, and it goes around. These conflicts, these people all have different points of view of what they want out of this enterprise. So the CEO gets stuck dealing with many of those challenges. And many times it's a balancing act, or it's sheer force. Next slide. There you go. If you find yourself in conflict, where you've got two people that are or more that are in conflict with each other, you have to be able to measure out what is the success you want. What is success? Because somebody is vying for one reason or another. And it's really interesting. So what do we get out of this? What is the success if I go this way or that way? And that kind of puts it in a perspective. The one thing that's really important is what are the value drivers for success? And how do you measure customer satisfaction? How do you have a long-range plan? If you went through all these items of being very careful to discuss with people, this is what we're trying to do, the chances are the fights and arguments and conflicts that go on with each other will be minimized, provided they were in there involving them. We're into like a retreat process. We do retreats, and we do that so that we get everybody to agree that these are the issues, and how do we, whoever we are, work together to solve these problems and to move the company forward. Once you get that agreement, a lot of conflicts go away. Look at the next one.
Jack?
Yes.
I have a quick question. This is kind of a
Should I go back?
No, that's fine. With me, I worked at a family-owned business once where the first generation of ownership were successful, and they sent their children to college. And their oldest son went to college in a field and got a degree in a field that was completely unrelated to the family business.
Sure.
But ended up coming into the family business, and from my discussions with that oldest child, kind of did it felt like he did it as a favor to mom and dad to work in the business, and mom and dad were expecting that child to take over the business and run it going on into the future.
Yes.
There was that big conflict there, and what ended up happening was the son did take over the business, but really wasn't into it. You know what I mean? And the business actually ended up closing down. How would you approach that kind of situation, and what would you say to those folks as they're going through that process? Obviously the communication wasn't there, where the parents did not understand where the son was at. So apart from doing a better job communicating, what would you say to those folks if you would go into that business?
And if you notice, I'm moving back to the screen that says system conflicts. Because in the family system, mom and dad put a ton of pressure on the child. And the child's obligation towards the parents is, there's this obligation not to harm the parents because they treated the child with such, honor and respect that there was this obligation. However, over on the other side, there's this rational focus that says, hey, this guy was a dentist, and we're doing trash hauling. And he wanted to be a dentist. He still wants to be a dentist. Maybe he wasn't successful as a dentist. But we're in the trash hauling business, and he's the smartest guy because he got a dentistry. He got his DDS. So he should be able to take that smarts and apply it. So part of the passion that goes on in an organization starts from the leadership, and mom and dad were the passion of that organization. And a dentist may not have that passion, but will be a great caretaker. However, you've got to, if the challenge you have with the dentist is, where does he or she get the value for their work and their ego? Owning a business is high risk. It's because you sign personal guarantees, and the banks are going to look at you when they loan you money. Are you capable of managing this money and paying it back on time? So when you start looking at how the system conflicts work, the dentist may have no skills. So there's going to have to be a learning curve here. The danger is that if the parents who are strong-willed push too far, the child's best recourse is to bring in a partner. And this partner, just like mom and dad were partners, you have to bring in somebody who is going to carry the weight of the management system, because the dentist will not do that. And this partner has to not only carry the management system, but have the passion for the business itself, because a dentist rarely has that. It's very typical to find the lawyer's son or daughter who comes back into the manufacturing company and does a great job, because they knew the law. What they didn't know is how to manage a manufacturing environment, so they got an operator to come in. There's a number of companies that in Ohio that I've met that have done that. You've got to have partners in any organization, and whether they be, because the president needs a check and balance for what they lack. And that's why with the clarifying of objectives, which I'm going back to now, you've got to have, where's the leadership? What are the competencies? If the dentist doesn't have them, you've got to shore it up with a partner.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jack.
Okay. I put this slide in here because I thought it was important to if you start finding yourself in conflict, you got to look at things differently. You're looking at each other. When you fight with each other, if you fight with your spouse, if you fight with somebody else, and there is conflict, there's a lot of emotion. To take the emotion away, you got to go back to what the business is all about. Does it have to deal with, is this problem dealing with customers or employee retention? Is it dealing with new customers or new employees? Is it dealing with new improved products? Once you start rationalizing, you will get away from the emotion. Then you can start dealing with the problems hand in hand. So I left a slide in here for you as a tool to say, how do you disarm somebody who's got a lot of emotion? Deal with what the objectives and what are you looking for success? Here are things you should start thinking about. Okay, now this next slide is a really important slide, because in succession, what happens is you have to understand, you as the president just became president in the last 6 months. Less than 3% of you make it become comfortable in 6 months. And less than 36% of you will be satisfied or successful or comfortable in being an effective CEO in 2 years. The vast majority, the 62%, are 3 years to 10 years, of which 3 to 5 is 54%. Now notice that being comfortable goes out as far as 10 years. There's 2%. The interesting thing that I wanted you to hear about this graph is that in order to groom a CEO, it takes 8 years, because it takes 3 years to get them ready, and then when they become the president, it will take 3 to 5 years to get there. And anything less than that, if you did not prepare that person, it's going to be 5 to 10 years. So if you don't advance the process 3 years in advance of when you're retiring, or 6 years when you retire, you're going to have a very disruptive process, and that's what kills businesses. Another thing that's important is how old you are. When I'm dealing with a 55-year-old who's trying to think about retirement in 10 years, the success rate is incredibly high. At somebody that's 72, the success rate for getting a good succession plan working is very low, because the problem you have with the 72-year-old is their whole being, their life, and their identity is all wrapped up in this business. I've met 84-year-old men who their successors are 75, and the business is making money, and they can't keep a 40-year-old, and they wonder why. And so it ends up that they keep losing good talent who can now compete against them. And it's just the nature of the beast. And I view that as that the probate court, or their wife or spouse, who will then own the company once they pass away, is going to have to deal with this mess. And it's one of those things that I think it's very important that a process be played. If you have conflicts, remind yourself of this screen if you're dealing with your next CEO. This screen was put in because I think it's important for you to understand as an organization, not as an individual, that in order to develop leadership, you have to have empowered teams to fix top problems. They also need to develop a long-range plan going out 15 years. And there is an importance of benchmarking the company's culture, because one of the things you will find is that once you benchmark the culture, then you can say, this is what I like about our culture, and this is what we don't, I'm using the word I, but I should be we, what we don't like about our culture that we should change. Once you get that in place, that as change occurs, people aren't threatened, feel unsafe, or find themselves in conflict with each other. Because their culture will say, we no longer want to backstab each other, no longer talk behind each other's back. And if it's done, the social system will work its way through and stop it. The best practices we've ever found have had to do with an annual management retreat that has to do with not fuzzy feel good, let's go have a party, but go away and say, hey, what are our issues right now? Let's compare ourselves from last year, and have we solved the problems of last year? And if not, what are we going to do about that? And then one of the things you do when you form teams is you develop a mentoring process to develop the next generation. We're finding a number of companies where the 55-year-olds have no 40-year-olds. They only have 30-year-olds. And so the 40s are not there. And the difficulty is that the 40s have disappeared. And so there's no leadership transition from a person that's 60 to a person that's 35. It's a real tough transition. And that's common. We're seeing that in a number of organizations. When we work on the family ownership issues, we want to make sure that all parties have a method to express their concerns. What happens is you'll have two brothers, they go home, they bitch to their wives about, or their spouses about what the other person was doing. And it ends up that the spouses only hear half the story. When we come into those kinds of environments, we actually sit down with the spouses as well and say, you're only getting half the story, but we want you to be a part of the whole story. So we will form a council so that you can, if something doesn't sound right to you, here's your chance to ask what is really going on. It also helps because when we bring in the teenagers, who also are very attuned to their parents and the issues that are going on, they have a chance to hear what's going on as well. So that's usually an annual event, like at a shareholders meeting. And they should create a vision if they own the company since it's mom and dad have passed, what do we do with this thing? And if it's been placed in a trust, the trustees need to, and the kids are now beneficiaries. They need to know what their role as a beneficiary are. If they're trustees, they have to know what their roles are and have to be trained in these areas. So a family council system will do that. We also suggest that an independent directors be on the company board so that you can diffuse family rivalry or family histories from impacting the business. And as I said, we combine the annual and council meetings so that the family can participate in knowing what it is to own a company and inspire the children to be the talent pool for the future. One other thing that's important, Chris, to respond to that. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but I didn't unmute my phone in time before you started on the next slide. We had a question about what you thought about advisory boards.
They're great.
My guess is it's probably similar to what you were just talking about on that last slide.
Yes. Advisory boards are a nice way to start because in the governance process, if I'm a director, my power is that one vote, go or no go, yes or no. But it's a collective vote that gets a go or no go. An advisory board has no vote. What they have is they're getting people used to the idea of reporting to somebody. So one of the challenges for me, just say Jack Veale, my company's PTCFO Inc. I run it myself. My kids are on the board. And so I run my board whenever I want to. And they only get what I want them to hear. And then I die. My kids are running this company or owning this company, but who's running it? And the conflicts that my sons may have over what's going on in the business is now falling on this poor guy or gal who's taken over my business. And so an advisory board is a great way for allowing my sons to talk to professionals about the behavior of my replacement without impacting the organization. In the meantime, the CEO has a chance to work through these people into developing a strategy that can be sold back to my sons. And that is where then it can lead to a governing system where these advisory board members become full board members. And it's a dating process. I always recommend advisory boards to new boards because the one thing you don't want to do is you may not like Jack Veale as a director. So keep him as an advisor. You know, I may be the wrong fit for a company. So therefore, how do you know that until you test drive them through an advisory board process? To just out of the blue take 3 interviews and hire me in and say, you're now on a board, and I had no idea what I was walking into is not fair to either party because a lot of time was wasted.
Just for my clarification, as much as for the participant that asked the question, that would still be a different entity than the family council and the board of directors, correct?
Let's go back.
Okay.
Let me go back here. I should have gone back to the screen. When you have if you look at the ownership issue, when you have ownership issues, you need to have a governing board and trustee handling that. Okay. Now, in a family business, I may have sold my stock instead of to my kids. I sold it to a trust, you know, a GRAT or whatever, and so that trust is now the owners of the stock, and my children and my grandchildren are the beneficiaries. So there's an issue of ownership that you need to have a good independent board. However, if you have management and it's not an ownership issue, then an advisory board is the great way to go because advisory boards help management. They don't help owners. They help managers. Okay? And a CEO dealing with a number of issues should have an advisory board because as soon as the advisory board turns to a governing board, the governing board is now their boss. And an advisory board works with the family council.
Okay.
And grooming the next generation. But a governing board will not do that. That's not their role. Their role is to govern the company for its performance. So it will set expectations of sales growth. Where's your long-range plan? We need one to agree to it so that we can make sure the CEO follows it. I mean, these are the things that board will do. But an advisory board says, how can we do things better? Geez, Chris, you ought to be doing this.
Right.
A governing board will do some of that, but they're actually got to vote. Do we go for this or not?
Right. Okay, great. Thanks, Jack.
Did that help? Would that person be kind enough to say if I answered the question well for him or her?
Well, we'll put it out there, and you can certainly, the person who asked the question can certainly chat back whether or not it was covered or not.
Okay, cool.
And we can cover it later as well.
Okay, cool. I'm just trying to find out where we are. I think we're here. Yep, so the next screen. Remember, in the family system is about emotion versus rationalization in the business. So to separate the emotion, you got to deal with the facts. So it's important to go back to the screens that I shared with you that said, here are things you should be focusing on in a business. If you have a family issue in which you threw a snowball in my face, then let's talk about that at a pub. But in the business, let's focus on what we're here for. We're here to solve this thing. Do we have a customer problem? Do we have a customer retention problem? Do we have this kind of problem? What is the problem? And separate it from the emotions of the family where you threw a snowball in my face 30 years ago. Such as and avoid the word you, and frame the issues with I, such as I was hurt by those actions, not your actions, those actions. So rechanging it from saying you hurt me, you're saying I was hurt by those actions. It leads to it, and this is where people say, well, this is a communication issue. No, it's really a think about the best practices of how you do things. And this is not a communication problem because you'll blurt whatever you have to do. Just think before you act. When conflicts don't resolve well, try using triangulation systems. And a triangulation is a very typical process that happened in your lifetime, everybody's lifetime. You had a mom and dad and you. There's a triangle. So if you couldn't get it from mom, you try dad or vice versa. And those triangulations is about solving a problem. So you've learned since a kid how to triangulate. And it's now using a system of councils, boards, and trustees to use those systems well to reduce the conflicts. On a number of occasions, I've had families where they said, Jack, we'll never get our family together. And I can show you 5 years after I'm gone that there's a picture of them smiling with mom. Dad was dead. And they told me they never would have had that picture unless we went through what they went through. And it took them years, by the way, years, not weeks, years to resolve their issues, long after I was gone. But you had to put in a system that they could follow. And that is putting family councils, boards, advisors, and trustees. When you get a lawyer, I use the word lawyer for an advocate, somebody who's on your side, only creates more emotion and anger and doesn't reduce the tension. So make sure when you pick this triangulated person or group that they're not advocates for one position or another, that they're actually neutral parties making a vote. One of the things in partnerships, which is if you have a 50-50 partner, one of the best things that I've ever worked with is being not me all the time, but I've had numbers where I'd walk in where the partner said, we have here Jack Veale. Jack Veale has 2% of the vote. Each of us have 49, and Jack has 2. Because if we can't come to an agreement on something, Jack's going to have those 2% votes. So, and his role is not to be on one side or the other. He's looking at the best interests of the organization. So back to triangulation again, it's having that third vote that's so important to making sure that as long as there's an honesty and it's not a corrupted environment, that third person, that non-advocate, is really, really helpful to an organization and to a family. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that I put this personal best practices in as well because, you know, when you do get into a fight or you do get into a conflict, there's some Stephen Covey statements that say, I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but there's a number of, you know, truisms to it. And seek to understand and be understood is the statement that refers to the listen for what is felt as well as what is said. Make conflict resolution the priority rather than winning or being right. Focus on the present issues. Avoid the past. Pick your battles. Will your spouse agree? So one of the things you do, if you were to pick a battle with me, would your wife agree that that's a good thing to do? Because if she says yes, then go for it. If not, why? And if it's not your spouse, your best friend. Sometimes continuing on makes you feel better, but it creates more harm in the future. And so one of the things you should do, we always recommend, is let something go. It's time that we just agree to disagree and move on. And the word I'm sorry is an incredibly powerful stress reducer, both for the person who said it, but the person that received it. The word I'm sorry is such a powerful word, or set of words, that I think it's important that you realize by saying that from time to time is incredible. And it actually builds both esteem to both parties. It also makes a safer environment for people to address issues properly. Now, I left this screen as the last one, and I did it so that because I'd like you to understand that in the growth, if you look at the screen, there's a left-hand bottom that says growing, that it stops at stable. And then from there, it's aging. In the business life cycle, the predictable conflicts that go on each stage through the growing stages, they're very predictable, and they have to do with conflicts of growth. If you've raised teenagers who argue with you all the time, that is a typical adolescent stage in an organization where because they're starting to become adults. When they become stable, the organization does not want to break the status quo. And when the people that are, by the way, just so you understand, P stands for production, or producing results. A is administration, meaning to control and put systems in place. E is for entrepreneurialism, which also means taking risks and innovation. And integration is about having people work well together. If people are working well together, you notice on the left-hand side, it doesn't happen on the growing stages. It's one of the most difficult parts of a growing organization, is getting people to work well together. In the stable side, people are working well together, but they're not producing results. So it's a kind of a catch-22. You want people to work well together, but it's going to be normal that in a growing organization, people are going to disagree. The fights that go on at GoGo are going to be totally different from the fights that are going on in early bureaucracy, because the fight that's going on in GoGo is we're running out of money. We need to, we're growing like heck. Our inventories are exploding, and we got receivables, and we're trying to get control over the organization. So we're hiring a CFO who says, "Hey, we need to get control over this thing." On the other side, we don't need control. We got a ton of control. Problem is, we have no more new products, because all the people that invented these products are long gone. They've left or died, and all we're doing is working off patents that are expiring. And so the conflicts there are, who's causing the problem in early bureaucracy versus what's the problem in GoGo. And as you look at this life cycle, and it's a study that you do for about this is a 3-hour presentation, I'm just making you aware that these are the challenges you will typically have in an organization, family or not. It happens with everybody. And with that, I'm closing out, and
Jack,
I would open to questions.
Jack, we had a question come in. On integrating a child into the business that hasn't previously been in the business.
Yes.
And my guess is, the person who asked the question can feel free to contradict. My guess is some of the issues we see is that the current people that you have in a business don't necessarily either respect them, or they think it's kind of a nepotistic kind of thing. And again, the person who asked the question can feel free to disagree with that, but my guess is that's what's kind of relating to.
Okay. Well, first of all, Chris, you're my son. And how old? To ask the person how old is that how old will the child be?
Well, since I'm your son, I'll say I am 44.
Okay, but you're 15, 20, or 30, because it's important.
Right.
You see, at 15, you're a slave. You're coming in, and you better do work, and you're reporting to the toughest supervisor in your organization with free reign to fire him. He can fire you at any point, and God help you when you get home if you get fired. Okay? Right. And if you don't, and the expectation I have with Mary, who's your supervisor, is don't let you get away with murder. If you have to fire my son Chris, Mary, do it. You got my power. You will not be. You'll never get me angry. And I don't want you to be my replacement. I just want to make sure Chris learns the business from the bottom. Because when he starts leading from the top someday, he has to understand what the jobs everybody does. And I would make sure that every supervisor make it tough on Chris to, not on tough to be mean, but to get to understand the real issues in a business from the bottom and how hard it is to satisfy a customer's need. Because at age 20, you're now getting in a stage where the person is now working in the summer for you, and not during the week after school, but is now working the summer and is looking at other careers and looking at the business as a potential career or as an option. If the person decides, if you're a lumber dealer, and I'm going to pick a lumber dealer because I worked with a number of lumber dealers with the same problem. The lumber dealer, the son graduated from college, he got a finance degree, he's ready to come in the business, bad. I would tell him, don't go in the business, join. If you're a lumber dealer in Ohio, go find one in Boston. Go find one in Florida. Go find one in Chicago. I don't care, wherever it is, but not in Ohio. And there's buddies. I'd call my buddy in Chicago and say, hey, my son's graduating. If I have to pay for it, I will do it, but I'd like him to work for you. And because at some point, if he gets promoted, I want to hire him. Well, and that is how a lot of associations work their families, is that they cross-pollinate, and they actually build up friendships amongst non-competing environments so that they learn best practices from elsewhere. So I would tell that and I would never hire the kid from school, because there's no way that the company that the mom and dad are running is running the best. No way. I don't care. If the 80-20 rule says that 80% of them aren't being run at the best. So it's best to have these kids learn from somewhere else and make all the mistakes of not showing up at work on time and taking advantage. They can't take advantage of stuff. So by the time they come in at 25 or 20, 30, they got a work ethic. They totally understand that they're promotable. So they've driven trucks, they've driven, they've worked the retail floor, they've worked in the warehouse, they've had to deal with all these other things, and they got promoted because they learned to respect the people from below them. And that leads them with the skill sets that by age 30, they're actually highly productive people with a career in mind.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things we always recommend is if you want your child to go in the business, is to send them out in the outside world and get a promotion or two and see how they do with that, and see if they're capable of actually coming in and leading the organization at some point. So.
Well, and most of the moms and dads that are running the business, they're already part of an association that they can actually take a child from outside the community, which is really important for them to do. Is to take a person from Ohio and move them to Chicago, where they aren't under moms and dads' wings and all the pressure of asking a dentist to come back, is they actually come out and they learn how to do business in the field of what mom and dad are doing. And if they have no interest, let's say they become a dentist, then the best practice is they can't come in as any executive. They have to come in and work their way up. They have to know the bottom up. So I would never take a child at 40 who is a lawyer, who probably has been asked because mom and dad are retiring to take over. To take over and to start from the top is dangerous at best. And so getting them to the floor and working their way up, and give it about a year or two, gives them a breadth of knowledge of what the business is all about, what the challenges are, what kind of people he's working with. They get to know him on a first-name basis and vice versa. And that leads to the leadership side of reducing the conflicts that come because they now appreciate each other and respect and feel safe with each other.
Right. Okay, great. I'm in the interest of keeping things moving. We're heading up to an hour. I'm going to go ahead and unmute all the phones.
The conference has been unmuted.
And so I'm going to open up the floor if anyone else has got any questions they want to ask Jack. Okay. Jack, did you have any last comments you wanted to make?
No, I'm thankful for you showing up. Hope this was worth your time to listen, and appreciate any feedback you have later on to how I could do this better.
Okay, great. I want to thank again Jack for speaking at today's session. I really believe that the things that we discussed here today are some of the most important things that you can deal with. I've seen over the years in working with small businesses, and matter of fact, seeing the way my dad handled the exit out of his small business, that these family issues and these emotional issues and how you handle that kind of relationship aspect of things can really have a profound effect on the tax decisions that you make, the financial decisions that you make, or do not make in a lot of cases. So I really want to thank Jack for coming out. What I will do now is I'm going to stop the recording part and then open up the phone lines one more time to see if anyone wants to ask a question off the record. So we'll be doing that.
Thank you. Please stand by.